Ethan Carter sat at his cluttered desk, staring at the screen in disbelief. The numbers flashed on his monitor. His startup's financials had tanked overnight. The investments he had trusted had failed spectacularly. His entire future was collapsing. How did this happen? He muttered to himself, scrolling through the panic-inducing news reports. His mind raced as his phone buzzed. Another investor pulling out. His stomach tightened, a cold sweat forming on his brow. The weight of failure bore down on him. He had put everything into this business, his time, his energy, his life savings. And now, it was all slipping away in an instant. As the news of the loss spread through the company, Ethan realized this wasn't just about money. It was about his identity, his worth. The failure was personal, and he couldn't avoid the fallout. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as the call ended. The room seemed to close in on him, the weight of the situation sinking deeper. He turned to face Rachel, his partner. She was in the doorway, looking at him with concern. "Ethan, what's going on?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, but there was a sense of urgency in it. Ethan shook his head, trying to steady his racing heart. "We've lost everything," he replied, his voice cracking. Rachel stepped inside, her expression a mix of shock and disbelief. "What do you mean? How did it happen?" Ethan couldn't answer. The numbers on the screen had told him everything. The investors had pulled out, and now, the company's future was in jeopardy. He had no answers, only a sinking feeling that he had failed. Ethan stared at Rachel, his thoughts racing as the silence hung between them. She waited, her arms crossed, clearly expecting an explanation. He sighed deeply, rubbing his eyes. "I trusted those investments," he muttered. "I thought everything would stabilize after the last round of funding." Rachel stepped closer, her voice softening. "You did your best, Ethan. We'll figure this out, together." But Ethan wasn't sure that was enough anymore. He had bet everything on this venture, their future, their dreams. And now it felt like it was all slipping through his fingers. "I should have seen it coming," he said, regret dripping from his voice. Rachel's gaze softened. "You couldn't have predicted this." But Ethan felt the sting of failure deep in his chest. "I have to fix this," he said firmly. The weight of his words hung in the air. He didn't know how, but he had to. Ethan stepped away from Rachel, unable to meet her eyes. "What do I do now?" he asked, his voice raw with frustration. The sound of the phone's last ringing tone still echoed in his ears. Rachel hesitated before replying. "Maybe you should talk to Richard. He's been through something like this before." Ethan froze at the mention of his old mentor. Richard Foster, once a financial genius and now a fallen guru, had always warned Ethan about the risks of the startup world. But his advice had felt outdated, and after Richard's fall from grace, Ethan hadn't considered reaching out for guidance. But now, in the midst of this collapse, it felt like his only choice. "I'll call him," Ethan replied, though part of him dreaded it. He had nothing left to lose. The phone call to Richard went unanswered. Ethan cursed under his breath, his grip tightening on the phone. He had hoped for some semblance of reassurance, but now, all he had was silence. Then, the phone buzzed, an incoming text. It was from an unknown number. "I have information that might help you. Meet me in 30 minutes. Ethan frowned, puzzled by the message. Was it a prank, or something more? But desperation clouded his judgment. He had nothing left to lose. He glanced at Rachel, who raised an eyebrow at the phone in his hand. "Who's it from?" she asked. Ethan shook his head, staring at the screen. "I don't know, but I have to go. I'll be back soon." With a final glance at Rachel, Ethan grabbed his jacket and left, the weight of his decision hanging heavily in the air. Ethan's desperation grew with each passing day. His phone rang non-stop, each call worse than the last. Investors were pulling out, and the creditors were closing in. Ethan paced his office, clutching the phone tightly. "There's got to be another way," he muttered. He couldn't lose everything, not like this. The weight of failure crushed him, but he couldn't afford to give up. As his thoughts spiraled, a text message appeared on his phone. If you want to save your business, I might have an opportunity for you. Meet me in 30 minutes. Ethan hesitated. Could this be a lifeline or another trap? His hands shook as he dialed Rachel's number. I need to go. I'll explain everything later. He hung up, determination in his eyes. He was going to take a chance. Ethan met the mysterious contact in a small, run-down cafe in a hidden part of the city. The air was thick with cigarette smoke, and the scent of stale coffee lingered. His contact, a woman named Olivia Clark, was waiting in a corner booth. She was younger than he expected. You've been making bad decisions, she said bluntly, looking at him over the rim of her cup. But there's still a way out. I know a few things about your investors. Ethan leaned in, listening carefully. You can save your business, but it's going to cost you. You'll need to take risks, more than you ever have before. Ethan's heart raced. Was this his only chance? He nodded slowly, agreeing to hear her out. Back at his office, Ethan paced again, trying to process Olivia's words. Take risks, she had said. You have nothing left to lose. But the idea of pushing even harder, of gambling on a solution that could further damage him, felt terrifying. He couldn't trust anyone now, but desperation clouded his judgment. He picked up the phone and called Jacob Hayes, a venture capitalist who had backed his company early on. We need to talk, he said, his voice strained. Jacob's voice on the other end was cold and detached. I'm out, he said flatly. Your startup is a sinking ship. Find another way to fix it. The call ended abruptly. Ethan dropped the phone onto the desk with a heavy thud, his anger mixing with a deep sense of failure. Ethan's next move was a gamble, but there was no turning back. He arranged a meeting with a rival company, one that had been eyeing his business for months. It was the only way he could salvage something from the wreckage. When he arrived at the sleek, glass-fronted building, he was greeted by William Cross, a cold and calculating corporate tycoon. You've made a mess, Ethan, William said, a smirk creeping across his face. But I can help you. For a price. Ethan listened carefully, trying to maintain control of the situation. He knew he had no other choice but to agree to William's terms, but his gut told him he was walking into a trap. As the deal progressed, Ethan's mind raced with one thought. He couldn't let his company fall into William's hands. The deal with William Cross left Ethan feeling uneasy. But he had no choice. The following days were filled with endless meetings, phone calls, and frantic decisions. As the pressure mounted, Ethan found himself questioning everything. Was he sacrificing his company's soul just to survive? One evening, as he sat at his desk alone, the phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Rachel. I need to talk to you. It's important. Ethan didn't reply right away. His mind was clouded with 1,000 thoughts, but he knew he couldn't keep avoiding her. With a deep sigh, he picked up the phone to call her back, trying to push aside his growing anxiety. Something told him this conversation would change everything. Ethan stared at the screen, watching the numbers tumble further into the abyss. His latest financial move had failed. The sinking feeling in his gut intensified. This wasn't just another bad day. It was the end. The text from Rachel still buzzed on his phone, but he couldn't bring himself to respond. His mind raced, desperately trying to find a way out. His entire future depended on salvaging the business, but with every phone call and email, it seemed like all doors were closing. The office was quiet, too quiet, as if the weight of his failure had stilled the air. He slammed his hand on the desk in frustration. How could I have been so blind? He muttered to himself. His phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Olivia. He knew he had to answer, but dread filled him as he reached for the phone. Ethan answered the phone, his heart pounding in his chest. Olivia's voice came through, cold and clear. You're in deeper than I thought, she said. This isn't just about your company anymore. It's about your reputation. The people backing you are pulling out. Ethan's stomach twisted. He had known it was bad, but not like this. Olivia continued, warning him that his financial backers were preparing to abandon ship, leaving him with nothing. I can still help you, but you'll need to make a move now. If you wait, there won't be anything left to save. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of her words. His mind raced, but a part of him already knew what he had to do. He had no choice but to go through with it, no matter the cost. Later that evening, Ethan met with Rachel. She was waiting for him at the small apartment they had shared for years. The dimly lit living room was filled with tension. Rachel didn't ask how his day had gone. She could already tell by the look on his face. "We're almost out of options, aren't we?" she said quietly, not needing an answer. Ethan rubbed his eyes, overwhelmed. "I don't know what to do anymore. Every move I make feels like it's one step closer to the edge," he admitted. Rachel reached for his hand, offering him a moment of comfort amidst the chaos. "We'll figure it out, but we need a plan," she said, her voice steady. Ethan nodded, but a part of him knew there might not be any way to fix this now. The next day, Ethan's world felt like it was closing in. He received another email, this time from Jacob Hayes, the venture capitalist who had been one of his first backers. The subject read, "We're pulling out." Ethan read the email over and over, each time the sting of betrayal cutting deeper. He had trusted Jacob, believed in him, but now that trust felt like a cruel joke. Desperation set in as he reached out to every other investor he had, trying to save the sinking ship. But each response was the same: no new investment, no interest. By midday, the weight of it all became too much. Ethan sat in his office, surrounded by piles of rejection, feeling more isolated than ever. He was alone, and there was no way to dig himself out this time. Ethan knew he was at a crossroads. His back was against the wall, and there was no way out except forward. That evening, he made the call. "I'm in," he said, the words feeling heavier than they ever had before. It was the kind of decision he had promised himself he would never make. But, after everything, after losing so much, he had no choice. He was willing to risk everything for a shot at redemption, even if it meant sacrificing his soul in the process. As the conversation ended, Ethan sat in silence, staring at the city lights outside his office window. He didn't feel relief, just a sense of inevitability. Whatever came next, he had crossed a line, and there would be no turning back. Ethan sat at his desk, the weight of his decision pressing down on him like a physical force. The gamble he had made was unfolding before him, and though it offered a glimpse of hope, it felt like a long shot. He stared at the document in front of him, the proposed merger terms, and took a deep breath. Olivia's words echoed in his mind. "This is your only way out. You take this chance or lose everything." The clock ticked away, the sound louder than ever. As the hours passed, Ethan reached out to the remaining investors, praying for their support. "We're moving forward," he typed, sending the email with a trembling hand. He didn't feel relief, only a strange calm that made him question if this would be his redemption or the final nail in his coffin. As the days passed, Ethan saw his risky decision slowly take shape. His new partner, Vince Calloway, a sharp calculating investor with deep pockets, started to make his presence felt. The merger was official. There was no going back. The phone calls came in faster now, each one adding another layer of pressure. As Ethan met with Vince in his sleek high-rise office, the contrast was stark. Vince's sharp suits and polished demeanor were worlds apart from Ethan's own disheveled state. "You've done well to get this far," Vince said, his voice smooth, but with an underlying edge. Ethan could feel the weight of every word. "But now you play my game," Vince continued, making it clear that this deal came with a price. Ethan had no choice but to nod. There was no turning back now. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan found himself buried under the weight of the deal. The pressure was relentless. The financial backers, though now on board, began pushing their own agenda, expecting faster returns and higher stakes. Ethan spent sleepless nights going through reports, making calls, and negotiating. His eyes were red from exhaustion, but he pushed forward. One evening, after a particularly grueling meeting with Vince, Ethan stood by his office window, staring out at the city. His thoughts were a whirlwind, but in that moment he realized something. The stakes had never been higher, but neither had his resolve. "I have to win this," he said aloud, his voice steady. The company, his career, everything depended on this gamble, and he wasn't about to back down now. In the midst of his mounting anxiety, a breakthrough came unexpectedly. Ethan received a message from Richard Foster, his former mentor, who had been eerily silent for months. "I know you're struggling, Ethan," the text read. "But there's a way to turn this around. Meet me, and I'll show you how." Richard's message was cryptic, but it reignited a spark of hope in Ethan. The old financial guru had fallen from grace, but he knew the system better than anyone. Ethan made the decision to meet with Richard the next day. As he prepared for the meeting, he couldn't shake the feeling that this could be the turning point, or just another dead end. Ethan met Richard in a small quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city. Richard looked much older now, his once sharp features softened by time and regret. The mentor who had once been a towering figure in the financial world was now a shadow of his former self. "I know you're in over your head, Ethan," Richard said, his voice low, as they sat across from each other. "But there's a way to outsmart them. You need to stop playing their game and start playing your own." Ethan listened closely, absorbing every word. Richard outlined a plan, a risky, unconventional strategy that could give Ethan back control of his business. It was dangerous, but it was also the only option left. Ethan had never felt more alive with possibility, but he also knew that it might be his last chance. Ethan's heart pounded as he sat across from Rachel, the weight of his decisions crashing down on him. "I've been betrayed, Rachel," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words felt like acid in his mouth. Rachel looked at him, disbelief spreading across her face. "By who?" she asked, her voice soft but urgent. Ethan stared at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. "It's Vince," he finally admitted. "He's been using me all along. The merger, the investments, everything was a lie." The room seemed to grow colder. Rachel's face twisted in shock, but then determination took over. "We'll fix this," she said, her tone unwavering. Ethan nodded, but the doubt in his chest gnawed at him. Could he trust anyone anymore? The betrayal weighed heavily on Ethan, but he couldn't afford to wallow in self-pity. He made the decision to confront Vince directly. The following day, Ethan found himself standing in front of Vince's towering office building, the cold glass reflecting his anxious face. The door slid open, and he walked in with a sense of quiet determination. Vince was waiting, his ever-present smirk plastered on his face. "You came. I didn't think you had it in you," Vince said, voice dripping with sarcasm. Ethan stood tall, trying to mask the fury boiling inside him. "You lied to me," Ethan said, his voice steady but firm. Vince leaned back in his chair, unbothered. "You were always a pawn, Ethan, but you were useful. That's why I kept you around." The words hit like a punch, and Ethan's hands clenched into fists. This was it, the moment he had feared. Ethan walked out of Vince's office, his heart still racing from the confrontation. He had gotten nothing but cruel words in return, but a part of him knew it was never going to be easy. As he stepped out onto the busy streets, the weight of the world seemed to press down on him. But as he walked toward his car, a text message buzzed on his phone. "I've got information on Vince. It could end everything for him." The sender was unknown. Ethan's pulse quickened. Who could this be? A whistleblower, perhaps? Desperation led him to quickly dial the number, his hands shaking as he waited for a response. The voice on the other end was calm, but with urgency in its tone. "Meet me tomorrow," the voice said. Ethan agreed without hesitation. This could be his only chance. The next day, Ethan met the whistleblower in a dimly lit cafe, its worn-down exterior belying the importance of the information within. A tall man, dressed in an oversized jacket, waited for him at a corner table. His face was partially hidden, and his hands trembled slightly as he passed over a manila envelope. "This will end Vince," the man said, his voice low and shaky. Ethan's hands moved quickly to open the envelope, revealing a stack of papers, emails, financial statements, and insider documents that proved Vince's role in the illegal dealings. "This is everything," the whistleblower said, standing up to leave. Good luck. Before Ethan could say anything, the man vanished into the crowd. Ethan sat in stunned silence, the weight of the documents sinking in. This was his chance to expose Vince for everything he was. Ethan didn't waste any time. He called Rachel, meeting her later that night in their apartment. The papers lay on the table between them, the weight of the evidence undeniable. This is it, Ethan said, his voice filled with a quiet determination. We expose Vince. We end this. Rachel looked down at the documents, her brow furrowed. This could ruin everything, Ethan, she said, her voice tinged with fear. But it's the only way to stop him. Ethan nodded, the finality of the decision settling in. If we don't do this, he wins. We can't let him walk away with everything. Rachel placed her hand on his, offering silent support. Then we do it. Together. As Ethan looked at her, he felt a sense of resolve he hadn't felt in weeks. He wasn't alone anymore. Together, they would take down Vince. The days after the decision to expose Vince felt like a whirlwind. Ethan couldn't sleep. Every moment was filled with anticipation and dread. He knew the stakes had changed. If they went public with the documents, it would destroy Vince's empire. But it could also ruin him. Sitting at his desk late into the night, Ethan reviewed the papers once again. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Rachel. We're almost there. But I need to know, are you sure? Ethan's finger hovered over the reply, uncertainty flooding him. He thought about everything he had lost, and the potential he had left to gain. He could already hear Vince's voice mocking him. It made his resolve stronger. I'm ready, Ethan replied, finally feeling a surge of confidence he hadn't experienced in a long time. The next morning, Ethan met Rachel at their usual spot, a small diner on the edge of town. She was already there, her face pale, eyes tired from lack of sleep. It's time, she said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet urgency. They went over the plan again. It had to be flawless. One slip-up could destroy everything they had worked for. Once the documents go public, there's no going back, Rachel warned. Ethan nodded, the gravity of the situation sinking deeper. We have to do it now. We've come too far. They sat in silence for a moment, both knowing the risks were enormous. But they were ready to face whatever came next. Later that afternoon, Ethan sat in his office, the documents ready to be sent. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He had come this far, but now doubt gnawed at him. Could he really do this? His thoughts raced, wondering if this would finally end Vince's manipulation, or if it would drag him even further into the abyss. He pressed send, his heart racing as he did. The weight of the action hung in the air. He looked at his phone and saw a message from Rachel. It's done, we can't go back. The finality of the decision hit him. There was no turning back now. His mind flashed back to everything that had led him to this moment. Every choice, every mistake. This was his chance to make things right, or ruin them forever. Ethan and Rachel sat in the small apartment, waiting for the response. Minutes felt like hours. Then Ethan's phone buzzed. He opened the message, his heart pounding. It was a response from one of the investors who had received the documents. We're in. It's time to expose him. Ethan's hands trembled as he read the message again. The weight of it hit him. Vince was about to face everything he had worked to hide. But this victory felt hollow. As Ethan looked at Rachel, he could see the same mixture of relief and anxiety in her eyes. We did it, she whispered, but neither of them could shake the feeling that the battle was far from over. This was only the beginning. The day of the public reveal came quickly. The media storm that followed was overwhelming. Ethan stood in front of the press, flanked by Rachel, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but Ethan remained calm, answering each one with the confidence of someone who had nothing left to hide. We had to do what was right, Ethan said, his voice steady. This is about justice. As the questions died down, Rachel squeezed his hand, a silent gesture of support. Ethan knew that the battle was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, He felt like he had taken back control. The aftermath of the exposure was chaotic. News outlets buzzed, social media exploded with reactions, and people who had once been allies now turned on Ethan. Yet, through all the noise, one thing remained clear: he had survived. Sitting in his office late one night, Ethan couldn't help but reflect on how far he'd come. From the depths of failure to this moment of uncertain victory, the journey had been brutal. The phone buzzed with yet another media request. But this time Ethan didn't feel overwhelmed. He had been through the worst of it. His resolve was stronger than ever. "I didn't come this far to back down now," he whispered to himself. Tomorrow was another battle, but Ethan was ready to fight. Ethan met with Rachel again in their favorite quiet cafe. The storm of the last few weeks had left them both drained, but there was something different in the air now. They weren't just surviving. They were reclaiming their future. "What happens now?" Rachel asked, her voice low but determined. Ethan sat across from her, the weight of his decisions lingering in the air. "Now we rebuild," he said. "We take what we've learned and make it better. We can't let everything we've been through go to waste." Rachel nodded, the ghost of uncertainty still hovering in her eyes, but there was something new in her gaze: hope. "Together," she whispered. Ethan smiled, a genuine tired smile. Together. Ethan and Rachel sat across from a group of potential investors, the air thick with tension. This was the moment that could either make or break everything. Vince's empire had crumbled, but now they had to show that they could rebuild. "This isn't just about business," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the nerves that buzzed in his chest. "It's about integrity. We're here to prove that success can be built on honesty and hard work." One of the investors raised an eyebrow, skeptical. But Rachel spoke next, her voice unwavering. "We've been through the fire. We're not afraid of taking risks, but we do it the right way." The room fell silent as the investors exchanged glances. Ethan could feel the weight of their decision hanging in the balance. But he had made his choice. He was ready to take this next step, no matter what. After the meeting, as the investors left, Ethan and Rachel stood in the now empty boardroom, their hearts pounding. The deal wasn't closed yet, but the first step had been taken. "We're not out of the woods yet," Rachel said, her voice quiet, but her eyes were filled with the fire of a fighter. Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I know. But for the first time in a long time, I actually believe we can make it." He looked out the window at the bustling city below, his reflection mingling with the city lights. "Whatever happens, we'll handle it. We've been through worse." Rachel stepped up beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We've got this," she said, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a sense of peace. Ethan sat at his desk one final time, looking at the documents spread out in front of him. The road to recovery had been long, but this was it, the culmination of everything he had fought for. The business was back on track, and his reputation was slowly being restored. He thought back to the early days, when everything seemed so simple. But he had learned a hard truth. Success wasn't just about making the right choices. It was about the courage to keep going, even when everything seemed lost. He took a deep breath and leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting to the window. "We made it," he whispered. And for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace. Whatever came next, he was ready for it.